The kitchen clock ticked steadily, the only sound punctuating the otherwise quiet evening. Daniel sat at the dining table, his hands clasped around a cooling cup of coffee, his eyes fixed on the barely touched plate of dinner across from him. Emily sighed. She had called an hour earlier, her voice light and nonchalant, explaining that her meeting had run late and she'd be home soon. This wasn't unusual, not anymore. The message in her written replacement in the file startled his sister, but tonight, something was different. Daniel's mind churned as he replayed their conversation, dissecting every inflection in her tone, every pause. Lately, her excuses for late nights and sudden business trips had grown more frequent, more rehearsed. The once impeccable trust between them felt like it was unraveling, thread by thread. He wanted to dismiss it as paranoia. They had been married for 12 years, a partnership built on love and mutual respect. Or so he thought. Emily had always been ambitious, her career at the marketing firm demanding long hours. He admired that about her, always supportive of her dreams. Yet, as the weeks passed, a gnawing unease took root. The sound of Emily's car pulling into the driveway jolted him from his thoughts. Daniel rose and walked to the window, watching as she stepped out, her sleek black hair cascading over her shoulders. She looked perfect as always, her crisp business suit immaculate, yet there was a tightness in her smile as she greeted him, a shadow in her eyes that made his heart sink. Even though she was walking towards him, there was a sense of distance. "Sorry I'm late," Emily said as she entered, planting a perfunctory kiss on his cheek. "It's been a crazy day." Daniel nodded, forcing a smile. "You must be exhausted." She shrugged, moving past him to the kitchen. "Just another day at the office. I need a shower." "Be back in a bit." Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor, each step echoing in Daniel's ears. As she disappeared upstairs, he noticed something out of place on the counter. A hotel receipt tucked partially beneath a stack of unopened mail. He stared at it, his pulse quickening. The name of a downtown luxury hotel was printed across the top in bold letters. A chill ran down his spine. Picking it up, Daniel's fingers trembled slightly. The date matched one of her recent business trips. His rational mind scrambled for explanations, client meetings, a corporate retreat. But a deeper part of him refused to ignore the glaring possibility. One or two people certainly couldn't be trusted. He slipped the receipt into his pocket, his resolve hardening. He had to know the truth, no matter how painful. Tonight, he decided, would mark the beginning of his quiet investigation. The next morning, Daniel sat in his car across from Emily's office, gripping a thermos of lukewarm coffee. He had dropped her off earlier, feigning enthusiasm about her long day of meetings, but instead of heading to his own office, Daniel waited. It was a strange feeling, stepping into the shadows of his own life. He felt equal parts ashamed and determined. By mid-morning, his patience paid off. Emily emerged, not with her usual brisk stride, but with a casual, almost buoyant demeanor. She wasn't alone. A tall, well-dressed man with a magnetic smile walked beside her, his hand lightly brushing her elbow. Daniel's heart clenched, his vision narrowing on the interaction, what the corporation was doing to Mrs. Jones. She seemed to reflect back the awful things she had said. Her anxiety, weakened by blood. He didn't need introductions to know. Mark exuded the easy confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable. Daniel recognized it as the same air Emily had adopted lately, a mix of boldness and detachment that left no room for doubt. Emily laughed at something Mark said as they walked toward a nearby cafe. Daniel's stomach churned at the sound. How long had it been since she laughed like that at home? He stayed in his car, fighting the urge to confront them on the spot. His plan demanded patience. He pulled out his phone and opened the app he'd installed the night before, a discreet tracker synced to a tiny device he had attached to Emily's car key. It wasn't the most ethical choice, but ethics had taken a backseat to the truth. A blinking dot on the screen confirmed their location, a cafe Daniel had never been invited to. Instead of following them inside, Daniel took a calculated step. He entered the cafe's parking lot on foot, blending into the busy weekday crowd, and positioned himself near a window. His pulse quickened as he saw Emily and Mark seated in a corner booth, their heads close together. He raised his phone and snapped a photo, then another. The images weren't incriminating on their own, but they added to the growing mosaic of betrayal. Daniel's next move came later that evening, when Emily announced another overnight trip. She claimed it was for an executive strategy session at a hotel an hour away. This time he didn't argue or press her for details. Instead, he nodded, offering his usual smile and an "I'll miss you." She returned the sentiment with the same distant warmth that had begun to feel rehearsed. Once she left, Daniel sprang into action. He reviewed the GPS tracker, noting the precise location of the hotel. Then, armed with his phone and a small digital recorder, he followed. The drive was long, the silence in the car filled with his racing thoughts. What would he find? And what would he do when he found it? Arriving at the hotel, Daniel parked at a distance and watched. Minutes later, Emily emerged from the lobby with Mark, her hand slipping into his. They moved with an ease that suggested this was no new arrangement. Daniel raised his phone, snapping another series of photos. Each click of the shutter was a quiet testament to the collapse of his marriage and the foundation of his resolve. Daniel sat alone in his study. The evidence of Emily's betrayal spread out before him like a crime scene. Photographs, GPS logs, and timestamps from his recordings formed an undeniable narrative. Each piece stung like a fresh wound, but together they fortified his resolve. This was no moment for emotional outbursts or rash decisions. Daniel's strategy required precision. He needed more than proof, he needed impact. The next day, Daniel visited an old friend, Adam, a private investigator who had once helped him track a missing client's assets. Adam, a wiry man with a quick mind and a sharper tongue, leaned back in his chair as Daniel laid everything out. "I need everything you can get on Mark. Background, finances, career history, skeletons in the closet," Daniel said. His voice steady despite the turmoil within. Adam studied him for a moment before nodding. "I'll dig. But you should brace yourself. Guys like him don't operate clean." Days passed, each one dragging as Daniel went about his routine, maintaining a facade of normalcy. Emily, oblivious to his suspicions, seemed even more detached, her smiles perfunctory and her attention elsewhere. Daniel's observations took on a clinical detachment. He noticed the subtle changes, her new perfume, the way she checked her phone with furtive glances, the hours she spent preparing for presentations. When Adam finally called, Daniel felt a mix of anticipation and dread. "Your guy's a piece of work," Adam said. Mark's had 3 previous employers and each one saw suspicious financial activity around the time he left. Nothing proven, but enough to raise eyebrows. He's also been spotted with at least 2 other married women in the last year. Daniel's grip tightened on his phone. "Go on, is using Emily," Adam continued. "She has influence in her company, right? Mark's aiming for a promotion and he's leveraging her to get it. Whether she's aware or not, she's part of his game." The revelation hit Daniel like a second betrayal. It wasn't just his marriage on the line. Emily was a pawn in someone else's scheme. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, forming a picture of manipulation and deceit that ran deeper than he'd imagined. "Because we knew he was ill as well as we did," said Daniel. Daniel's mind raced. This wasn't just about personal revenge anymore. It was about exposing the entire web of lies. With Adam's help, he planned his next move, gathering evidence that not only confirmed Emily's affair, but also tied Mark to professional misconduct. Over the next few days, Daniel worked quietly but relentlessly. Adam supplied him with financial records and office correspondence, linking Mark to questionable deals. Meanwhile, Daniel retrieved Emily's work emails from a shared computer at home, finding messages that confirmed her unwitting role in Mark's machinations. Echoing Mark's sentiments, Daniel read through his emails. By the time the pieces were in place, Daniel felt a grim sense of purpose. He wasn't merely confronting a cheating wife, He was dismantling a manipulator's entire house of cards. The evening of the dinner party arrived, a seemingly ordinary gathering of colleagues and friends, hosted by one of Emily's closest work connections. The house, a sprawling suburban mansion with soft jazz playing in the background, brimmed with laughter and clinking glasses. Daniel and Emily arrived together, her hand resting lightly on his arm. To anyone watching, they were the perfect couple. A facade Daniel wore like armor. Emily excused herself to mingle, her sleek dress catching the light as she disappeared into the crowd. Daniel's eyes followed her briefly before he slipped into the shadows of the room, his heart pounding, not with fear, but with a cold resolve. Tonight would be the culmination of weeks of careful planning. He had chosen this setting deliberately. The guest list included several of Emily's co-workers, her boss, and even Mark, whose arrogance ensured he couldn't resist attending. Daniel had spent days preparing, ensuring every detail of his presentation was flawless. In a quiet corner, Daniel checked his phone, his thumb hovering over the folder containing videos and photos of Emily and Mark's encounters. Alongside them were incriminating documents tying Mark to financial misconduct at the company, evidence Adam had procured with meticulous precision. Mark's booming laugh drew Daniel's attention. Across the room, the man stood confidently, drink in hand, regaling a small circle of guests with a story. Emily stood near him, her smile radiant, her laughter effortless. The sight should have gutted Daniel, but instead it steeled him. He approached the group casually, his expression unreadable. "Mark," he said, his voice pleasant but carrying a weight that silenced the conversation. Mark turned, his confident grin faltering slightly. "Daniel, good to see you, man." Daniel nodded, his smile tight. "I thought this might be a good time to share something interesting with everyone. You don't mind, do you?" Without waiting for a reply, Daniel stepped to the center of the room and clinked his glass for attention. The room quieted, all eyes turning toward him. Emily's face paled as she realized he was about to speak. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Daniel began, his tone calm and measured. "I wanted to take a moment to share some recent discoveries, ones that affect not just me, but this entire group." He set his phone on a nearby table, connecting it to a projector he had arranged earlier with the host. The first image appeared on the screen, Emily and Mark entering the luxury hotel. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. A rush of embarrassment hastened their retreat. "I regret to inform you," Daniel said, his gaze sweeping the room, "that my wife and Mark have been engaged in more than professional collaboration." Before anyone could respond, Daniel clicked to the next slide. Financial records tying Mark to fraudulent activities within the company. And it appears his ambitions extend beyond his personal life. Mark's face drained of color. Emily stumbled backward, her hand covering her mouth. The room erupted in whispers, but Daniel stood firm, a man who had reclaimed control of his narrative. The room was frozen in stunned silence, the images of betrayal and deceit displayed on the screen like a tableau of exposed lies. Emily clutched the back of a chair for support, her usually composed demeanor shattered. Mark's confident posture crumbled as his eyes darted around, seeking escape. Daniel, standing at the center of it all, felt a strange calm wash over him. For the first time in months, he was in control. "I debated whether to bring this up privately," Daniel began, his voice steady, addressing the crowd. "But given the circumstances and the stakes involved, it felt only right to lay everything out in the open." Emily found her voice, though it quivered with desperation. "Daniel, please, let's talk about this at home." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You mean the home where these meetings first began?" His words landed like a slap, and Emily's face crumpled. Mark tried to intervene, stepping forward with his hands raised. "This isn't the time or place." "But it's exactly the time and place," Daniel cut him off sharply. He turned back to the guests, most of whom were wide-eyed with shock. "Mark isn't just involved with my wife. He's been exploiting her influence at the company to further his own career, and he's been doing it at your expense." With a few clicks, Daniel displayed emails showing Mark's manipulations, carefully crafted to implicate others while steering lucrative projects his way. He didn't stop there. Financial records from Adam's investigation followed, revealing Mark's undisclosed conflicts of interest and questionable offshore accounts. The following day, while Emily's betrayal is personal, Mark's actions are criminal, Daniel continued. He's jeopardized this company's reputation and trust. I've already shared this information with the board of directors and law enforcement. The weight of Daniel's words sunk in, rippling through the room. Mark stammered, trying to defend himself. This is absurd. These documents could be fabricated. Daniel's lips curled into a faint, cold smile. The authorities will decide that. I've made sure the originals are with them. The sound of a door opening cut through the rising tension. 2 uniformed officers stepped into the room, accompanied by a company representative. Mark's bravado dissolved as they approached. "Mark Stanton," one officer said, "we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of embezzlement and fraud. Please come with us." The room erupted in murmurs and gasps as Mark was handcuffed and escorted out. His protests faded into the background as Daniel turned back to the guests. Emily stood alone, trembling, her face streaked with tears. "Daniel, please. I never meant for it to go this far." He regarded her with a sadness that cut deeper than anger. "You made your choices, Emily, and I made mine. We're done." Her eyes widened. "We're done?" She closed her eyes. The finality of his words hit her like a wave. She reached for him, but he stepped back, shaking his head. "I'll have the divorce papers sent over," he said, his tone devoid of bitterness, just weary resignation. "I hope you find whatever it was you were looking for." Turning to leave, Daniel felt the weight of months of suspicion, heartbreak, and planning finally lift. He didn't look back as he walked out into the cool night air. In the weeks that followed, Daniel began rebuilding his life. The fallout from the revelations was significant. Emily left the company, her reputation in tatters. Mark faced multiple charges and years of legal battles. For Daniel, the path forward was one of quiet healing. He found solace in small things, long walks by the lake, reconnecting with old friends, and rediscovering hobbies he had set aside. One afternoon, he packed away the remnants of his shared life with Emily, replacing old photographs with new mementos of his own. The final piece of closure came at a local coffee shop, where a woman named Claire struck up a conversation about a book he was reading. Their laughter came easily, unforced, and for the first time in months, Daniel allowed himself to hope. As he left the shop, the sun setting behind him, Daniel realized the truth of his journey. Justice had been served, but the real victory was reclaiming his own happiness. This conclusion resolves the plot threads while introducing hope for Daniel's future. It avoids repetition by focusing on the aftermath and Daniel's steps toward healing. Let me know if you'd like to explore any specific elements further. "Can we expect hope for the future?" Daniel asked.